And we've already had an executive session. So, council, any questions on agenda or items on consent? I think we did make a change on consent agenda. Brian, is that right?
Yeah, we're removing item A from consent. So it's just the minutes that are listed.
It'll be just the minutes? Okay.
Correct.
My revised agenda I received still had item A on it.
It's just continued.
Continued.
Yeah, it should just be removed because it's being continued.
Yeah.
The public hearings that we're removing or not acting on tonight, we will have to make a motion to continue those to the date certain, September 21. But the agenda for the consent, we can just remove that one.
Okay, so when we have a motion on order of agenda, we need to make that comment probably?
That and the addition of item C to the mayor's business are the three changes.
Okay.
Somebody got that in mind?
All right. Any other questions about agenda or consent? Councilor Akabo.
Well, I think it's fine. I had some kind of questions or comments about the wildfire situation, and but I think I can hold those then because our communications just following mayor's business has been added. So I'll insert my comments at that point when we get the update from staff.
Okay, sounds good. Anything else? I'm not seeing anything, so why don't we proceed with our work session? Well, let's see, any concerns from council? In this day and age, you don't have any concerns, do you, whatsoever? I'm most concerned about Charlotte's chickens. Don't know whether it's or not.
They don't know when to go to bed. No.
All right. Let's jump into work session topics if we can, starting with the Coffee Creek Logistics Center discussion or presentation. Ms. Rybold, afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon, Mayor Knapp and councilors. I will have a really quick presentation about one of the public hearing items you have before you tonight. I will go ahead and share my screen now to pull that up. Just give me one moment. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So this is annexation and zone map amendment ordinance for the Coffee Creek Logistics Center. The purpose of my presentation right now is twofold. One, to just give a refresher on what is unique about the process here, just to provide some background, because I know there's a couple of councilors who weren't here when we adopted this particular code, and then as well just to offer you an opportunity to ask any questions you might have. So first off, the subject property for the annexation and zone map amendment is along the northwest edge of the city of Wilsonville on Clutter Street, just to the west of Garden Acres Road. It's 5.85 acres in size and is within the city's Coffee Creek industrial area. This graphic here, I actually pulled this back from 2018 when we went through the adoption process for the Coffee Creek form-based code. This is a specific overlay that pertains to the Coffee Creek industrial area. And essentially what it does is it adopted a set of clear and objective standards to evaluate future industrial development in this area. So one of the unique things we did here to try to make the process a little shorter and simpler for applicants, knowing that it was a clear and objective process, was to change up our typical review, which for a normal land use application, you would first go to the DRB. The DRB would make a recommendation on all of the applications, and then the annexation comprehensive plan map amendment and zone map amendment would have gone to council for your review and then approval. What we adopted adopted with Coffee Creek was a concurrent review. So the council or the application types that required council action would go directly to city council once we had a complete land use application. And then the other component applications would be reviewed either administratively or through the DRB if the applicant was requesting waivers. And so that is why you have before you tonight this annexation and zone map amendment request that does not have a DRB recommendation with it. So just to quickly highlight, annexation of 5.85 acres into the city of Wilsonville, as well as the zone map amendment going from the Washington County FT20 district to PDI RSIA, which is our planned development industrial district, specifically for the regionally significant industrial area. So part of why we changed the process is we really knew we had one option to select from when it came to that zoning district. And I'll also note that the reason we don't have a comprehensive plan map amendment anymore with this is because when we adopted the Salt Creek comp plan amendments, we amended the comprehensive plan map. And so this area is now designated for future industrial use. Just a quick highlight of the proposed development. It is approximately 110,000 square feet of warehousing and distribution use with some accessory offices. It's being designed in a manner that could either support one or two tenants, depending on the user, as it is speculative development. It preserves a tree grove that currently exists in the northwest portion of the site. It also, on the frontage, incorporates one of the industrial waysides that is part of the Coffee Creek Code recommendations and provides circulation while also integrating landscaping into the site. There will be a public hearing scheduled before the Development Review Board at the end of the month. They will be reviewing the other component land use applications as well as 5 waiver requests for this, and so that's why this one is going to the DRB as opposed to being reviewed administratively. And then approval of these will be contingent upon council approval of an annexation and zone map amendment. Just to quickly highlight the waiver requests, the 3 of them are really tied together related to the building design and some unique features of their use and how that integrates with the site, and those would be the last 3. There is also a waiver for vehicle parking area in terms of how there are 2 separate smaller areas in front of the building as opposed to just one to serve the possibility of 2 future tenants. And then the loading berth location along an addressing street is the other one. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have on this prior to going into the public hearing. Thank you.
Council, questions? I would like to ask a couple of things. First of all, what happens if they don't get development approval from DRB, number one, or if they do get development approval but don't develop within the 2-year period that it provides?
So to answer the first question, there is within the code an expiration on the annexation and zone map amendment ordinances. So there is from the date of adoption, which would be your second reading of the ordinance, there's 120 days for the applicant to get approval of the stage 2 final plan. That's the part of it that really governs the form and function of the site. If that doesn't happen, you know, what we'll do is, given the timing of everything, we'll start working on that annexation process upon getting the second reading approval. That being said, there are places in there where we can make sure that we hold it and it doesn't go forward and get recorded with the Secretary of State's office in terms of the annexation. So we would make sure that we have a DRB decision as well as getting past the appeal period before actually going through with that step. As for the second question, like other development approvals we have in the city. They remain valid for a period of up to 2 years. So that being said, if they do get the approval, what you will have is a piece of property that has been annexed and rezoned within the city. But if 2 years goes by and they do not implement their approved plans, then they either would have the option of filing an extension, which you can do that a couple of times, or if they don't do that, those other approvals would expire, and then you would just be left with the pieces of property within the city.
If the piece of property is in the city and we don't have Washington County's zoning, then how would the zoning expire but the annexation not expire?
So we will, if, let's say the DRB approves this and everything goes forward, we will apply the PDI RSIA zoning. So once it becomes annexed into the city, officially it gets the city zoning applied to it.
Okay.
So that will all happen together.
So just to remind the council, we've had some discussion in times past about the difficulty of getting properties to annex into the city, and some are operating on approvals from the county that don't really mesh with our vision for Coffee Creek industrial growth. And so it would seem like it's appropriate to me that we maintain this annexation once it's applied for it, if it's finally approved. And we have likelihood of one of those alternative uses that don't really align with the Coffee Creek concept so well, but fit within some of the county's categories, I guess. So that seems like that would be helpful. Hopefully this would proceed if it gets the approval. Other question I had is, we had set the form-based code with some fairly specific things about appearances from the public right-of-way and how that works. They flipped the building around and they want to have their trucks all across the front, which was specifically not something in the form-based code. Did staff talk about that?
Yes, that was a point of discussion that the project planner had with the applicant. The orientation of the site, as I understand it, makes it a little more difficult to rotate that building and have the same size and circulation that allows it to function as it should. A lot of that is that it is you lose because it's more rectangular, so it's a wider parcel than it is deep, and so when you rotate the building, we asked, is there a way that you can angle it or do something different? And I think it's just difficult to get to the size and type of building they need without doing that. I do one of the waivers, since it is a waiver request, they are required to go into the pattern book that was also adopted with the form-based code and make findings about how the project is still able to achieve the overall goals of the Coffee Creek industrial area. And so they do include findings within their submittal for the DRB review that address that. They do have a pretty significant screening with that industrial wayside proposed, and so that, in effect, with some of the architectural treatments, they are applying to try to minimize the presence of those docks in the front.
Is this the very first application we've had within the form-based code?
It is.
So it's an interesting test. It's interesting that they're finding the need for 5 waivers. It will be something I think we need to watch as we go forward if we have other applications, whether we're finding the ability to conform to the concepts in the code or whether we are continuously asked for waivers from those concepts. And so it might be an interesting discussion down the line as we gain a little more experience.
Absolutely. And we do have, when we adopted it, because it's a pilot period, we will evaluate it after either 3 applications or a period of 5 years, and we're already 2 years in. And if we do end up getting started on some of that Salt Creek work, I suspect we might be asking the questions to ourselves anyway with that.
Okay. Councilor Linville, you had a question?
Well, I just wanted to ask Ms. Reibold, if the DRB decides that they have issues or questions relating to the waivers, they could still continue their discussion within the 120 days and still be within the timeline. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And so hopefully some of the issues that will on these waivers will be questioned and resolved during that period of time. So that's great that they're hearing this soon. Thank you.
All right, I think that's what we need. Thank you very much, Ms. Reibold.
Great, thank you.
All righty. And item B and C are the 2 items that are Frog Pond related, which are to be continued to September. There's different dates on those. Is that really correct, staff? That
Yes,
one is
yeah, those 2 items are continued to September, or October 5th and September 21st, respectively.
Yeah, so they won't be on the same night then.
Correct.
All right, next thing up then is the Wilsonville Investment Now, the WIN proposal that is being looked at for our urban renewal concepts. Mr. Vance. You're freezing up on us.
Jordan, you look surprised.
It was so scary.
I can't see his video at all.
Jordan, you're completely frozen on us.
Nick, can you take over?
I may be able to do that, so, or at least can try to tread water on the presentation until Jordan can rejoin us.
Thank you.
I have the PowerPoint here, so I can share my screen.
There it is.
All right, well, Mayor and Council, thank you, Nick Popenook with Tiberius Solutions. I've been helping Jordan on this project. Again, this is looking at what we're referring to as the Wilsonville Investment Now program. That is the next iteration, the next evolution of what used to be the TIF zones program. And I think this is intended to be a very quick update for you all tonight, in particular to highlight some of the feedback that we received from an Urban Renewal Task Force meeting about a month ago, and then to get your input and make sure that we are headed on the right track so that we can come back with a fully fleshed out program in the near future.
So, Nick, can I stop you? We're actually seeing your screen that shows like the next slide coming up and all your notes.
Huh, interesting. Okay. Let me.
So I think at the top, if you do like a new, try sharing it again.
There's Jordan.
Maybe Jordan can share it now.
Can you share your screen, Jordan?
Hi there. Do you want me to share a screen over here?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Can everyone see this okay?
Yes.
Yeah, that looks better.
Okay. Sorry about the interruption. I'll pass it over to Nick, but I think Nick teed it up and said we're trying to get feedback on the task force policy considerations. So Nick is going to kick us off with some background on the project and then give a basic overview of the new program proposal.
Thanks, Jordan. And these are the slides that I was intending to speak on. So, Jordan, you came back at the right time, and then I'll pass the baton to you and a couple more slides here. So the history of the program, I think everyone on City Council is well familiar with this. Adopted in 2013, this original TIP zone program was designed in the last recession as a way to offer incentives for new investment to occur on 6 specific sites. Those sites were identified because they happen to be home to some very large, underutilized warehouse-type facilities. The program was really modeled after the state enterprise zone program because the city of Wilsonville did not meet the qualifying thresholds for that program. And this was a way to use urban renewal, a tool that the city did have local control over, to essentially mimic the benefits that an enterprise zone would provide. However, the program required qualifying development to have at least 75 jobs, paying at least 125% of the county's average wage, and invest over $25 million of new property investment on the site. Given those thresholds, and given the 6 specific sites that were identified up front, there never were any developments that took advantage of the program. So in 2019, the program officially expired, and those TIP zone single site urban renewal areas all closed down. As staff talked about and sort of debriefed after the program expired, one of the key reasons why staff feel that no developers were able to take advantage of the program and why this was unsuccessful in attracting new high-wage jobs and high investment values into the city was largely that the program requirements may have been too rigid. So in particular, identifying only a handful of sites citywide where the program applies, as opposed to having it be broadly available and something that staff can really market to interested developers or businesses that are already here looking to expand on a different site somewhere else in the city. All that being said, last winter we were in front of City Council. That was in person, back in the good old days when we could have in-person City Council meetings. And we pitched this initial idea of the new updated TIP zones program, which we're now calling the Wilsonville Investment Now, or WIN program. And so the idea behind this is to keep the same general concept as the original version, but to provide more flexibility, which will hopefully make it a more attractive program and a more successful tool for economic development in the city. And although we began these conversations late in 2019, it couldn't have been more timely, as we are now in this recession in 2020, and certainly a good time to be checking your toolbox and all the programs that you have available to help jumpstart the economy and get things going after this recession ends. So we have been working on the details of the program. Those details of the program were presented to the Urban Renewal Task Force. This was back on July 22nd. So staff presented the proposal to the task force. That includes representatives of affected taxing districts, as well as local representatives of the community and of local businesses. And Jordan will be sharing with you some of the feedback that we received from that task force in just a few minutes here. So Jordan, the next slide, if you can advance it. Uh-oh. Jordan may have frozen one more time. Okay, so can folks see my screen now with the...
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So the key elements of the program, we'll run through these fairly quickly. The first 2 bullet points, tax rebate and eligibility criteria, value of new investment, number of new employees, and compensation of those new employees. These elements are all tied back to the original TIP rebate, or the TIP zone program. So structuring it as a rebate is important. There are several programs out there where government may be providing an upfront cash payment to a private business based on promises that they'll deliver certain amounts of new investment or employees. But in situations where those businesses don't live up to those expectations, that can be problematic. By structuring this as a rebate, those businesses have to pay their taxes up front, they then have to prove that they meet the eligibility criteria. And at that point in time, the city would then send them the rebate payment. So that's a key component of the program. On the eligibility criteria, again, we are really focusing on three main things: the amount of new property invested in the area, the number of jobs that they bring to the area, and the compensation level of those jobs. We will later tonight talk about a few other wrinkles that were proposed by the advisory committee, where we may have a few additional eligibility criteria that can be factored in. A few areas where this differs from the original TIF zone program is that these eligibility criteria are now designed to be flexible. So rather than having hard and fast thresholds where a business needs to achieve X number of investment, X number of jobs at X salary, now it is a flexible formula so that every dollar invested is worth this many points, every job at this wage level is worth that many points. And companies need to have a total combined score that is sufficient for them to qualify. And this just allows companies that maybe have a huge number of investment, but not quite that high of a level of employment, and to also benefit from the program, as well as vice versa, a company with a huge amount of employment, but maybe not the full amount of investment that we were looking for with the original TIF program. So additional flexibility. Along the same lines of flexibility, you'll see that the slide shows that this would have 2 tiers of benefits. So based on the score that a company would get from the amount of investment and jobs and wages, depending on if it achieved a certain point threshold, it would qualify for either full benefits, partial benefits, or no benefits. And the difference between the full and partial benefits that we have proposed is the duration of the rebate program. So the current proposal would be 7 years of rebate, tax rebate, for the full benefits, and 4 years of tax rebate for the partial benefits. And we can go over, I think, at a subsequent presentation, the nitty-gritty details behind those formulas and how many points and what levels of investment would be needed to achieve each. But at a conceptual level, those 2 tiers of benefits are also patterned off of the state enterprise zone program, which does a similar thing with offering 2 different levels of benefits for those participating companies. And then the last key bullet point here, and again, a big way that this program, the WIN program, is different from the original TIF zone program, is that this is designed as being eligible citywide, with the exception of overlapping existing urban renewal areas, since a property can't be in 2 urban renewal areas at the same time. So the way this program would work would be that the city council, if you support the proposal, sometime later this fall would adopt the overall eligibility criteria, the key program attributes, but it would not identify any specific sites that would be specific TIF zones. Instead, the city would wait until there was an actual application from a real developer, and if that applicant met the thresholds for qualifying for the TIF zone, or pardon me, for the WIN program, then at that point in time, city staff would come back with an official urban renewal plan to implement the WIN program on that site, and city council would then take action to adopt the urban renewal plan at that point in time. So those are the key elements of the WIN program. Jordan, have you been able to rejoin us on the presentation? All right, looks like we are going without Jordan for the time being. So
hey, Nick, I'm dialed in. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, sorry about the internet connection, folks. It was working okay during the test run. But if Nick, if you can go to the next slide, I can just give an overview of the Urban Renewal Task Force feedback.
Yep, we've got that slide up, and I'll advance the slides whenever you tell me.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nick. So we have a city manager-appointed task force, which is chaired by Urban Renewal Task Force, chaired by Councillor Ackerval. It's a group of public and private sector participants, including taxing districts, private sector businesses, developers, as well as residents. And they give us direction and comments on urban renewal projects and proposals. So we had a very robust meeting in July. We had about 30-some participants. And in the meeting, the participants voiced unanimous support for the WIN proposal. So the meeting was held virtually, and we used a polling mechanism in Zoom. So we were able to do an informal pulse check with the group, and 100% of respondents said they believe this is a good direction to take the TIP Zone, now WIN program. 100% of respondents said they believe this program will make the city more competitive with business recruitment, expansion, and retention. And then we had some really interesting discussion around additional policy considerations that they advised that we look into. So those being diversity, equity, inclusion, or DEI, local prioritization of local business expansion, and consideration around industry type and high traffic generator users. Can you go to the next slide, Nick?
Yep.
So here's a starting point for some diversity, equity, inclusion ideas. And the idea is this would be a menu approach, and it would be similar to grants, so it wouldn't be restrictive. It would be additional consideration if an applicant met a certain amount of these requirements. All of these benefits were thought to be simple, trackable, not overly burdensome for staff to monitor. And these were really came out of research from best practices that we've seen in other jurisdictions around the region and state, particularly Gresham and Portland. And so some of these requirements were found in enterprise zone programs from other cities. So the first three are certifiable, very trackable on the state's website for certified minority, women, business enterprise, disadvantaged, service disabled, certified B Corporation for businesses that practice responsible practices for their products, their workforce, and the environment. We've seen other jurisdictions that have enterprise zones have a procurement plan option. So there could be a good faith effort of the employer to increase goods and services purchased from a certain population in a certain geography. So for example, if we felt it was important for businesses to purchase from other businesses owned by people of color in potentially the Portland Metro, or we could say the South Metro. Focusing on workforce development, so companies that promote job openings to BIPOC communities, provide ongoing workforce training and professional development for their existing workforce, and then engage Wilsonville youth through mentoring, through educational opportunities that show career pathways for local employment. Another idea was to have a diversity, equity, inclusion company program. So if the company has at least one full-time employee that is committed to a program, it would show that they have resources that they're putting against these priorities. And then last, we know that childcare is an economic development issue, that businesses need access to childcare providers to effectively recruit and retain talent. So it's more than a family issue. We know it's an equity, an economic, and a workforce issue. So potentially, if an employer was to coordinate or offer some type of childcare, maybe we would want to give them priority consideration. Yeah, you can go to the next slide.
Okay.
All right, this next one is pretty simple. So this would be prioritizing local business expansion. So we know that most of our economic growth comes from existing businesses versus big out-of-state relocations. So it's really recognizing that fact and giving priority treatment to our existing Wilsonville customers and businesses. We could also verify longevity claims with our city data, so similar to the COVID small business grants. So there could be a framework where maybe from 1 to 5 years, there would be additional points, and then 6 years and beyond, there would also be points. Can you advance to the next slide?
Mm-hmm.
So some really interesting discussion around industry type. So we heard from particularly residents about the idea of precluding large traffic generators like distribution companies. And so we know, especially for residents, this is an important concern. It's important for the city to manage quality of life and congestion in the community. And in speaking with the community development director and some staff internally, we had some other thoughts as well. One kind of guiding principle is, as Nick pointed out, that the rigidity of the program with the first iteration was not very successful. And I think generally speaking, the more restrictions or limitations we put on the program, I think the less effective it will be and the more narrow it will be. I think also when you look at the industrial marketplace right now, it largely is distribution flex. That's just sort of where the market opportunity is. And there's a misconception that these jobs aren't as high paying as manufacturing and other sectors, but we consistently hear from our industrial partners that these are good, high paying positions. So it's a little bit of a misconception. And then a thought about the traffic. We feel that the city's current process ensures that the transportation infrastructure is commensurate with development impacts and would essentially screen out users that we can't accommodate. Every land use application has a traffic impact study that looks at problematic intersections, traffic impacts, and the city works hand in hand with employers on traffic management and mitigation plans to avoid PMP peak impacts. So simply put, the city's existing process should screen out high traffic generators that our transportation network can't accommodate. Another interesting comment we heard from the group was about traded sector industry. So we were encouraged by other economic development practitioners throughout the state, particularly the regional economic development group and the state's economic development agency, to focus the program on traded sector. So this is an industry term to describe companies that sell products and services outside of Oregon, thereby bringing in new wealth to the state rather than recirculating existing wealth. The WIN program inherently prioritizes high-value, high-wage projects, so the vast majority of businesses that qualify are likely to be traded sector. However, I think it'll be limiting for our options if we use this definition exclusively, which would preclude projects like professional services, finance, accounting, that don't necessarily meet the technical definition, but do bring high-wage jobs and contribute positive impacts to our local economy. Last, there's an idea of allowing remote employees, and this is one that particularly our local chamber has been championing as they believe it will signal to prospective employers that Wilsonville is innovative and receptive to current industry trends. So it's a little bit hard to envision a project that would qualify for a high-value facility with an entirely remote staff, but we know that the workplace trends are changing and evolving, especially with teleworking. So it's a trend that we'll continue to monitor. Our initial analysis suggests that if the business was administered in Wilsonville, the city would still benefit from the payroll tax. So I can't imagine we'd want to include the employee count in our scoring system if the city didn't benefit from the payroll. And other considerations to think about would be that if it was a remote staff, we wouldn't capture the dollars spent at retail and local businesses. But on the plus side, it would also be less impact to our transportation network. So if you could advance to the last slide, these are really the policy considerations we want to talk about tonight. So we'd like your reaction and feedback to the task force considerations and if these ideas are headed in the right direction. And as a reminder, we'll incorporate tonight's feedback and bring a complete program back for review, hopefully next month. So with that, we can move into discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Jordan. Council, what are your thoughts about this proposal? Now, I'm trying to remember how many of us were here when we did this first incentive program. Was it just Councilor Lehan and I that were here at that time? So it's not probably as well known to the rest of the council. I would certainly strongly second the comments made by Mr. Papanek that the plus side that we have experienced from the concept of using a rebate that only comes after people have paid their taxes and then qualified under the criteria, are they eligible to get a rebate? I think that on our initial attempt to work with the solar manufacturer that was proposing to come, that placed us in a very strong position and would have not resulted in the same outcome that happened in Portland when that company ultimately moved to Portland and were given some front-end incentives that never really produced the economy or the impact that was projected. So I would certainly strongly encourage that we maintain that concept of a rebate as inherent to the whole thing. What are the thoughts of council on the different pieces of the proposal? Councilor West.
Just a couple questions. When we talked about the considerations that would go towards an applicant, equity issues or pre-existing business already in Wilsonville, are those considerations weighted? And how do we determine that a certain applicant is more qualified based on those considerations more than another? So do we take equity in higher consideration than we do a business that's been here a long time? Or how does, or do we not have it figured out yet? That's my first question.
So I can take a first stab, and then Nick, you can chime in if you want as well. We don't have that figured out yet. We first wanted to check if this was the right direction from council. So I think that would also be part of this discussion. If this is the right direction, how much do we want to weight these topics? And then it would all go into the scoring system. So the main requirements at this point are centered around jobs, wages, and investment. And then these would be additional points on top of that we could decide how heavily we'd want to weight.
Okay, and then my second question is that flex formula that you're using to calculate a business's qualifications, where does that come from? Has it been used before? And what was kind of the impetus behind it?
So I'll let Nick talk a little bit about that as he devised that plan. We're the first jurisdiction in the state to do something like this. So we're the first jurisdiction to use site-specific urban renewal with this sort of framework, with the point framework. And the idea was that it would be more flexible, less rigid. And we heard from practitioners at the state that they said incentive programs typically either favor investment or jobs. But we think this is a really creative framework where it takes both of those into consideration, and it won't preclude high-value projects in either direction.
Yeah, and so some background in the specific formula that we're looking and working with right now. The original TIF zone program had these minimum thresholds of 75 jobs at 125% of the county wage and $25 million of investment. We wanted this new program to have the same level of rigor, but just with increased flexibility. So we came up with several different formulas, each of which would take those same criteria, a company with 25 million, 75 jobs at the right wage level, and would give that company the bare minimum score in order to qualify for the full investment. We then looked at, okay, well, there's a million different ways you could come up with giving that particular package of attributes a minimum score. It all depends on how many points per job, how many points per dollar of investment, and weighting those two things in sort of a seesaw approach. So we ran, I don't know how many different iterations of scoring criteria that we met with staff to discuss, some that weighted wages more, some that weighted employment more, some that weighted investment more. Ultimately, we wound up going with some of the formulas that weighted investment a little bit more heavily than employment. And we did that through talking with staff and looking at comprehensive plan language that the city has that did emphasize the fact that the city is particularly motivated in attracting more physical development and not necessarily bringing a whole lot of additional workers into the community if it's not coming with that tangible physical investment and growing the tax base. Additionally, along the same lines, even though this is flexible, and so it does still allow in the formula a company that has very low levels of investment to qualify if they have very high levels of employment, the amount of the rebate, though, is based on the property taxes paid. So in those situations, it almost evens itself out because the dollar amount that the city would be paying back out to those companies would be proportionately less anyway, as their investment is lower to begin with.
Okay, and my final question is, as I envision some of this in that 95th industrial area, of course, and a lot of those, which provides a fantastic, it's in one, not only is that type of property in high demand right now, the market's begging for it, but also we know that that does cause some traffic and big trucks over there, and it's kind of isolated in that north part of the city. So when we talk about traffic, are we talking about like, oh, they have a ton of employees and so they have more traffic? Or are we talking about they have trucks coming in and out of these plants or these warehouses, and so they will get, I don't know, a lack of consideration or deemed because of that traffic? And so would this disincentivize that flex use industrial type of property that's over there due to traffic concerns? I guess it's kind of where my thought process went, and maybe I don't know if I'm totally asking something invalid, but that's kind of where my thought process went, is that is such an asset to the city, is that part of industrial property that we have, and would it disincentivize more property like that in the area where we have it in the north part?
So I think you're right, Councilor West. This is Jordan. My understanding from the task force is especially residents, had concerns about freight traffic, and there was a particular project that was mentioned in Canby, Columbia Distributors. And so I think that was the concern, is how do we somehow preclude high traffic generators, especially with freight and truck traffic? So do we either disqualify them from the program altogether, or is it minus a point if it's a certain industry, for example, distribution, or if we include a traffic analysis in the application, if it shows that the user is a high freight traffic generator, then we would maybe subtract a couple points from their overall score. So it wouldn't necessarily, I mean, we can decide how we craft this, but that was my take from the task force.
And Jordan, Councilor Ackervall's jumping in, yes.
Well, are we done with that topic?
Yeah, well, and if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that okay? Because maybe you were going to comment on this right now. I noticed, in the packet from staff, let's see, I'm going to that page now, where it says that staff does not recommend limiting. That's what you were going to say, isn't it? So why am I taking the words out of your mouth? And it's not because, as I understand, because I had some questions about this too. How would this work? And we're calling this a win program, right? So we want it to be a win for the community. It's not just a win for the businesses. It's a win for everyone, hopefully. That's what we're looking for. And that's what I think we're trying to bring some of that flexibility in, so we can find the right fit that is truly a win for the community and for the business community. But what I understood in some of my dialogue, with staff after this task force meeting, is that they're not recommending to limit it or restrict that a certain type of industry cannot qualify for this program, because our city process and code for new developments, it should be looking at traffic patterns and is this new development appropriate for the area that they're proposing to go into. So it's not that the city has like a free-for-all on any type of development can locate, wherever in the city. Is that what you were going to clarify?
Yeah, you said everything that I was planning to say. I will add one additional point, which is that the nature of this program, where for any individual development to qualify, the city would then have to adopt the urban renewal plan that would enable the whole mechanism to work. And at that point in time, when the city council has a public hearing to adopt the plan, if there are huge outcries and the citizens are packing the council chambers with torches and pitchforks, the city council has the opportunity at that point in time to say, no, we're not going to move forward with it. So it didn't seem like this needed to be an official factor in the scoring system, or a hard pass fail where we're completely eliminating entire industries from qualifying for the program, but that we want to trust the city's land use planning process and trust that there will be another opportunity at the public hearing where city council can make informed decisions as needed on a case-by-case basis.
Other questions? Councilor Ackervall.
I guess I'll just give a little bit more kind of context or feedback on my perception too from the task force meeting. It's a really good format to have that task force where we can bring together representatives from all different facets on this topic, from the business community, from our taxing districts that are affected by this. City staff was there. It was a good group of people, and residents too, right? That had concerns about what does this mean? What type of industry are we encouraging within our city? Things like that. So I think the task force was really helpful in having that dialogue, and I very much appreciate kind of these additional considerations that they're bringing forward for us to consider as, I see it almost kind of like an extra credit part, right, with the program, that you could get extra credit in your application if you have some components that are maybe in alignment with these values that we want to see push forward within our city. And I thought that there was some fabulous ideas that were brought forward in that process. So I really appreciate the task force's their touch on this and their help in shaping it. I think, considering where we're at now and what would be the best framework for us to go forward, I realize, first of all, I'm so grateful that we are on this and, trying to have a program that we can use in marketing, because we are in a tough economic spot for, some time going forward. We're probably going to be in a tough spot. So to have this tool as a potential marketing piece for the city, I think that's a very powerful thing. It's a great positive thing for our economic development office to have. But I also recognize there's some question marks that we don't know yet as far as what will the workforce look like, what will the needs look like. So trying to figure out a way that we can wrap some of that flexibility for the future and ability to make adjustments as we go forward, kind of in looking at, okay, what is getting picked up, what are the needs. I'm curious about that piece too, with the timeline as we roll a potential program out.
Okay, Councilor Linville.
I just have a quick question about some of those, the criteria that was, as Councilor Ackerval says, gives them extra credit. And wondering if, how are they suggestive at this point, or is there an opportunity for input into those recommendations? Or is it in a sense that the task force has done its work and these are, these are the criteria, the eligibility that we would like to see?
So I can answer that. So these are not, the task force was not prescriptive. They just said that we should look into diversity, equity, inclusion. So these are staff ideas from doing research into other jurisdictions and what we're seeing in the metro and around the state. So we can absolutely adjust this and decide how much we want to prioritize this. My thinking is that it would maybe be a menu approach where we have a list of 8 extra credit benefits and the company can decide which ones are most appropriate or suitable to them, if any. And then maybe if they can achieve 3, a minimum amount. If they can do 3 or 4 out of the list, then we would give them additional consideration in their application.
Other questions, comments? I guess I'll jump in with a couple of things here. First of all, specific. Business operating in Wilsonville, 0 to 5 years. Well, what? So a guy comes down and rents a $800 office for a month and say, no, I've been here. I'm not sure exactly how that works for 0 years or 1 year. You might want to think about that. Another piece that I had made a comment to Mr. Vance about earlier, and that is this, just thinking about the concept. If a business came and said, well, I could locate in Coffee Creek where, they've already got a program going and whatnot, or I could locate somewhere else and I'd get this extra tax benefit if I did this somewhere else. Well, we've been putting millions of dollars into Coffee Creek to try to get people to come to Coffee Creek. So are we going to be kind of working against ourselves if we set it up so you can't use the WIN program if you come into an existing urban renewal district like Coffee Creek? Would we be better off if you could utilize the WIN program in an existing urban renewal area as well as in a new area we created just because you were coming and we're going to participate in the WIN program? Seems to me that there's some thought to go into the answer to that, and I'm not sure, but have you guys debated that up and down and around, or is that a different one than you have?
Nick, do you want to take a first stab at this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, Mayor, that the debate is not over. I think it's a perfectly great question to ask. I think that the initial inclination that we have to limit the program to outside of existing urban renewal areas makes sense for a lot of reasons, but definitely has the tension that you brought up, where now you have competing programs that might be luring businesses away from one area to the other. When we look at the Coffee Creek urban renewal area, the benefit that the businesses locating there would receive is the huge amount of infrastructure that the city is promising to build in the area. The new roads, the new pipes, everything that's going to allow development there to thrive and succeed, as well as the premium location that property has, right next to I-5. So I think it still has a lot going for it, but it's unable to deliver that if the companies that locate there then wind up having 7 years of their tax revenue go into their own pockets rather than going to pay for that infrastructure. So I think you're right that there's definitely the potential that we could be incentivizing a company that thinks that it's more important for them to get the tax rebate somewhere else in the city than to get the brand new streets and pipes in Coffee Creek. And we may find that that's a situation, and it may be that we need to address that some way. But I think there's also a tension of allowing businesses in Coffee Creek to take advantage of this program, because then where does the money come to build the infrastructure there that we need to attract those businesses in the first place? But it's a great question, and I think we can certainly do some more homework on that and come back to you with the full program and have more of an in-depth answer on that point.
Yeah, or there might be a smaller program or a different tier that could be utilized in an existing program, in an existing urban renewal area, than in one of these special areas also. I don't believe that in the past we've rebated the full amount of taxes. We rebate a certain percentage of the taxes, and our levels could be tuned with that percentage as well as with the other factors. Again, the flexibility idea. I guess one more comment is if we have a development that like fronts on Day Road, we still would likely be asking that company to do a significant street improvement in front of their project on Day Road. So it's not like they've got the entire suite of infrastructure all done necessarily. Other questions, comments? I think the staff is wondering whether we feel like they're on the right track here and we want them to push forward with developing this program and sorting out all these questions being asked. Councilor Linville.
I I think it's a really exciting way to look at economic development and workforce development for our community. I love the flexibility that has been put into the program. I like the incentive, the ideas of incentives. And allowing businesses to have from a menu where they might put their priorities. So I'm excited about this. I think that the mayor had an excellent question relating to our industrial area and incentives to get business and industry to move into that area. So I look forward to seeing how that might come back in some portion of the proposal. So, but I think it's a great idea.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councilor West.
I have some questions. I think it's innovative, though. I think, especially right now as we potentially face the economic downturn. I mean, historically, Oregon is often the first that seems to be hit by an economic downturn with all the unrest with fires and COVID. And I think that we may be one of the last states, unfortunately, and historically, this is true, to come out of such a downturn. And I think programs like this will make Wilsonville more competitive in such times. And so the fact that we already started this before all this happened means I think we're ahead of the game, even compared to other municipalities. I still have some questions about it that I think I'd like to see worked out, and I will have the opportunity to do that. But moving forward and continuing to work on this, I do support.
Thank you. Other comments? I do think I think it's a good thing to do. I mean, the context we had during the 09-10 downturn, we got to a point where 40% of our industrial properties were not occupied. I certainly hope that this current economic situation doesn't take us there, but I think it's both prudent and appropriate that we have an incentive program that we can use in ways that we've determined are appropriate, and as was mentioned earlier, as a win-win program for everybody, win for the city and the citizens here, and win for the businesses that are able to take on a project that they otherwise might not. I think that those are great approaches to take, and I'm really excited about seeing what specifics come forward. I think the general direction is real strong. Sorting out the details is the process that we'll go through. And I'm hopeful that we will not, as a state, be the last ones to come out of a recession, if that's where we end up. Certainly that was true when Oregon was primarily a resource economy. I think it's been less true as we've moved toward more of a tech economic basis, and I hope that we will be able to continue that direction to where we are a little closer to the front end of things than the back end of things. So, I think you've got support from council to move forward with it. So appreciate you. Look forward to the next step.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Council. Good evening.
Yep, thank you. Mr. Cosgrove, anything else for work session?
Nope, just we'll queue it back up at 7 p.m.
All right, should we call back in, or does it matter if we go out or come back?
You can just mute yourselves and then move about your cabin. We'll see you back at 7.
Cabin, yeah.
Free to move about the cabin. That means you can take your seatbelt off.